In this video, we'll begin creating our top-down shooter by creating a 2D endless scrolling parallax background. Not simply confined to shoot 'em ups, this technique can be used when creating anything from side scrollers or endless runners to a beat 'em up or 2D platformer. We've made the sprites we've created and used in this video completely free, and you can find them using the link in the description. So feel free to download them and follow along, or simply use them in your own game or project. Since for this exercise we won't be using our canvas, let's begin by hiding our canvas game object. Currently, our Astro Galaxy camera is facing backwards, so let's rotate our camera 108 degrees in the y-axis. And let's change our camera Z position from -10 to 10. If we enable our canvas, we can see, even though we've changed our camera rotation, our menu and canvas objects still appear in the correct position when viewed from our camera. To begin, let's create an empty game object, which we'll call Astor Galaxy Space Background, and we're going to place this object as a child of our game object. Next, we need to make sure our projection screen game object completely fills our camera. So let's scale our projection screen object until its borders go past our camera. Let's next create another empty game object, which we're going to call background 1. And we're going to make this game object a child of our Astro Galaxy Space Background. We also want to move our pivot point to match the bottom left edge of our projection screen game object. Something to note, by holding the V key and moving an object in our scene view, the object's vertex will snap to the closest vertex in the direction the object is being moved. With our setup complete, let's begin bringing the sprites into our scene. Within our texture folder, as well as our UI folder, we have a number of sprites that we can use in our game. However, before bringing a sprite into our scene, we want to ensure our mesh type is set to full rectangle, not tight. The difference between the two mesh types is the amount of polygons Unity will use to create and display our sprite. With that said, let's create a background using a background image and stars and planets by dragging our sprites into our scene to be a child of our background 01 game object. We also want to make sure that we align the bottom left edge of our sprite with the bottom left edge of our projection screen background. Something to note, when using sprites outside of a canvas, their render order isn't determined by their order in the hierarchy. Instead, within our sprite render component, under additional settings, we'll need to adjust that sprite's sorting order. The default order in layer is 0, and sprites with higher layer order numbers are rendered in front of sprites with lower layer order numbers. Despite what's visible through the camera, since this will be a scrolling parallax background, we want to be sure to place our sprites until they reach the edges of our background sprite image. With that complete, let's next duplicate our background 01 game object and rename it to background 02, and then we'll place its starting pivot point at the upper left edge of our background 01 game object. When you look at the items in the scene, the sprites of your background should seamlessly merge together with one another. For our background 02, let's adjust, move, remove, or add our sprites to vary the two backgrounds. With both our backgrounds complete, let's begin creating our parallax effect. Much like we did for the sprites in our menu, for this effect, we'll be creating and using an animator. So let's begin by opening up our animator window and then selecting our Astor Galaxy Space Background parent game object and create and save an animation. With our animation created and saved, before we begin animating, let's first go over how we're going to create this effect. Primarily, our Astro Galaxy background will simply be moving down, giving the illusion to the player that they're moving forward. However, the key to making an endless scrolling parallax effect with only two fairly small backgrounds is moving the first background once it leaves the player's view. This way, once the first background lines back up with its original starting position, we can seamlessly loop through the animation without the player knowing what happened. So let's first set our samples to 30, and let's add the properties for our parent space background position, as well as our background 1 and background 2 position as well. Let's then go to frame 300, and we'll move our space background game object to the point our background 02 game object is in the location where our background 01 was at the start of our animation. Let's also add a keyframe for our background 01 position. At the very next frame, we want to move our background 01 game object to where it's seamlessly above our background 02 game object. And we want to be sure that there's no seams on the background sprites of our two background objects. Let's next go to frame 600, and we want to move our space background down in our negative Y direction to where it appears as though our background 01 is back to its original starting position. With that complete, let's preview how our animation looks so far. And for the sake of example, let's increase our samples so our animation doesn't take as long to preview. We can see that at the point that our background 01 moved to its new position, we have a slight jump in our animation. Additionally, instead of playing smoothly, our animation starts slow, then gradually increases in speed and then decreases in speed by the end of our animation. The reason for this is the tangents on our animation are automatically set to smooth, which in the majority of cases helps animation look smoother and less robotic. However, since we want our animation to play at a consistent rate, we need to select all our keyframes, then right click, and under both tangents, we want to select linear. If we hit play, we can now see that our background moves at a consistent rate. However, there still seems to be a brief moment that we can see our background 01 moving into place. In order to fix this, we need to add our isActive property of our background 01 game object. And we need to set a key before, during, and after our game object moves in order to deactivate it while it's moving and then activate it when it's in position. With the primary elements of our background and effect working correctly, we can now add animation to the other elements of our scene.
Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to be the first to see this and many other tutorials, game development tips, and free game asset giveaways.